Thank you so much, Professor Seard, for that very kind introduction. I'd also like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Sovereignty has never been ceded. And I'd like to thank Uncle Andrew for that really provocative and wonderful address. Thank you so much. Now, I'm in that position of speaking after dinner. You've all had quite a lot to eat. You're probably starting to really relax and maybe feel a bit sleepy. So I'm going to ask you to think, and it's a little bit of participation, but don't worry, I'm not going to call on you. We just teach the Socratic method in law school. I'm not going to call on anyone. But I'm going to ask you to engage in a bit of a thought experiment with me. And in fact, Elena, you have warmed us up beautifully because we're going to be thinking about belonging. So thank you so much for that absolutely beautiful poem. I didn't even realise Elena was speaking, but actually, I think our talks match really well. So I want you to imagine something. Just imagine that the country in which you were born, the country in which your family has lived for generations, does not recognise you as a citizen. You feel you belong to your country. It's the only home you, your parents and grandparents have ever known. Now imagine that your inability to obtain citizenship is due to your ethnicity, or your race, or your gender. In other words, factors beyond your control. Now imagine that this means you can't go to mainstream school or university. You can't access adequate healthcare. You can't even obtain a driver's licence. In other words, your chances of living a decent, dignified life, the life to which we're all entitled merely by virtue of our humanity, being human, is severely compromised. This is called being stateless, and it's a condition that afflicts at least 15 million people across the globe as we speak. Stateless people are some of the most vulnerable on earth and are found in every country in the world. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees estimates that a child is born into statelessness every 10 minutes. Now, it's estimated that around 40% of the world's stateless population lives in the Asia-Pacific region, meaning that this issue is particularly salient for us here in Australia. One must only consider the plight of the Rohingya to understand that statelessness can lead to the most fundamental violation of human rights. The good news, though, is that statelessness is an entirely man-made problem, and therefore it means it can be eradicated by states. Every country has discretion over its nationality laws. Therefore, every country could choose to amend its nationality laws so as to eradicate statelessness within its border. For example, if every country in the world implemented the 1961 Convention on the Reduction of Statelessness so as to confer nationality on every child born within its territory, we would eradicate statelessness in a generation. Everyone's born somewhere. So if everyone obtained the nationality of the country in which they were born, we would not have this notion of statelessness. Yet sadly, it's not that simple. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the agency mandated to protect stateless people and work for the reduction of statelessness, is nearing the end of a 10-year campaign to eradicate statelessness by 2024. Now, I'd love to be able to stand here and tell you that we're almost there, that we're down to our last few. Unfortunately, that's not the case. Of course, many important gains have been made throughout the life of the campaign. At the same time, we see emerging cases of statelessness across the globe. For example, the 1.9 million people left off the National Register of Citizens in Assam, India, who were at risk of statelessness. The apparent intransigence of the 24 countries that still refuse to allow women to pass nationality onto their children on an equal basis with men. And the spectre of climate-induced displacement as a potential new cause of statelessness. You might be sitting there thinking, well, this is all really interesting and probably quite disturbing, but is this relevant in Australia? Well, Australia has historically recorded 0 stateless persons here. Yet, statistics reported by the Australian government to the UNHCR regarding the number of stateless persons in Australia has increased really significantly over the last 5 years. So in 2016 it was 0, 2017 it was 52, and in 2018 it was 132. The most recent data, published in June last year, records 7,649 stateless persons in Australia. So you might be wondering, well, what's going on here? This discrepancy, though, doesn't represent a sudden surge in stateless persons coming to Australia to seek protection. Rather, it reflects more accurate reporting. Yet even these vastly increased numbers can't be considered an accurate estimate of stateless persons in Australia. because we've got no consistent or coordinated system for counting stateless people here in Australia. All the way back in 1973, the Whitlam government ratified the 1954 Convention on the Status of Stateless Persons, which requires us to protect stateless people who come here seeking protection. But of course, in order to know who to protect, or to protect, we need to know who that group is, who they are, where they are, what their predicament is, what their protection needs are. But unfortunately, no government since 1973 has taken that crucial step of establishing a status determination procedure, or indeed creating a visa category for stateless persons. Therefore, unless a stateless person can also meet the criteria of a refugee, there is no visa pathway for them. Now, what happens when a non-citizen is not entitled to any visa in Australia? What would normally happen? Does anyone have any idea? If you're a non-citizen in Australia and you don't have a visa. Yeah? So what would happen though if you're found not to be entitled to any visa? Deported. But where? Where would you be deported to? Country of origin. Great. But where is home or country of origin for a stateless person? Without a country of nationality, there is no country to which a stateless person can be returned. In such a case, what do we think might happen in Australia in particular? Detention, indefinite detention. Australia is unique in operating a system of mandatory indefinite detention for non-citizens, and stateless persons are uniquely vulnerable to prolonged detention. The latest figures suggest that there are 40 stateless people held in Australian immigration detention facilities, some of whom have been detained for 8 years or more. Just take a moment and think about all the things that you've done in the last 8 years, all your life experiences. And consider, instead of all those experiences, you were stuck in immigration detention. And to be clear, this detention is not as a result of anyone violating any law, it's merely the result of being without a visa. So, as I hope you will now understand, statelessness is a pressing human rights issue of the highest order, but in my view does not receive the attention it deserves. I suspect that many of you here tonight had never heard of the issue prior to taking your seat at dinner, and in fact I did a straw poll at my table and most people really didn't have an idea of what it was. But that's okay, I mean, most people don't. But this is why 5 years ago, almost to the day, the University of Melbourne, with the generous philanthropic support of Peter and Ruth McMullin, I'm thrilled that Peter is with us tonight, established the Peter McMullin Centre on Statelessness at Melbourne Law School. My research, as well as the research of the team that I lead, is aimed at understanding the causes and consequences of statelessness and developing legal and public policy responses directed to the prevention of statelessness and the protection of stateless persons. Team members are undertaking research on statelessness in Nepal, India, Japan and Syria, as well as a range of innovative theoretical and legal topics within statelessness studies. My current Australian Research Council funded project is exploring statelessness in Australian law and practice and involves doctrinal legal research as well as identifying and interviewing persons with lived experience of statelessness. The aim of this project is to develop a blueprint for enhancing the protection of stateless persons in this country, as well as a template for researching statelessness that could be applied in the wider region. So there are certainly gaps in our laws that do need reform. Yet we do have one crucial protection that exists in our law to date, namely the right to Australian citizenship for children born in Australia who would otherwise be stateless. And this is a really rare example, as you probably could have a sense of in this space, of international law already being implemented, or at least having a place in Australian domestic law. However, research sponsored by the Peter McMullin Centre in 2019 revealed that most families that are entitled to this protection, that have children born here who would otherwise be stateless, A, have no idea that this provision is in the law, and B, even if they did, they wouldn't have the first clue as to how to apply for that right. So in 2021, the Peter McMullin Centre on Statelessness, in partnership with the Refugee Advice Casework Service and the Melbourne Law School Clinics program, launched the Stateless Legal Clinic. And this clinic, established and run by my wonderful centre colleague Katie Robertson, offers Melbourne Law School Juris Doctor students the opportunity to develop practical legal skills and directly assist in the delivery of essential legal services to stateless children. The clinic is the first stateless legal clinic of its kind in Australia and the third of its kind globally. And as I said, it partners with the Refugee Advice Casework Service, but also other organisations such as Refugee Legal here in Melbourne. This work is life-changing for both, of course, the beneficiaries of this legal service, but also for the students. As Amir, a stateless Palestinian father of 4 whose children have been helped by the clinic, explained, quote, "Being stateless has been a huge source of sadness for me in my life. At times it has made me question my very existence and made me wonder why my parents chose to bring me into this world. I've never felt like I have a future. Wherever I've gone, I've had no rights. I hope for better for my children." And through the clinic, we hope to go some way to ending intergenerational statelessness for at least some stateless families in Australia. So I wanted to end on this positive note because we could view statelessness as a wicked problem in every sense of the word. But I think we could also understand it as entirely solvable with the right mix of public awareness, technical support and political will. Our view at the Peter McMullin Centre is that change is possible and it's imperative if we're to fulfil the aims of the international community expressed in the Sustainable Development Goals, to leave no one behind. Thank you so much for your attention.